the thing that we would like to touch base on today is sort of fall programming. And the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is that, what the heck are you talking about, John? It's like the 1st of August. Well, no, this is exactly when you have to start getting that into sharp focus, because it's incredibly deceptive, especially as the honey flow winds down. Making sure that you've got a good timetable and a plan for your operation is crucial. And that's whether you have 2 colonies or 2,000 colonies. The reason being is that right now, mite treatment is, or making sure that your mites are under control is incredibly important. Waiting too long is like removing a bullet. Yes, it's good that you've pulled the bullet out of yourself, but the damage that's been done by letting it sit there for 2 weeks it can be pretty critical. And that's what the mites are doing right now. If you have a high mite concentration, you're looking at creating a massive disease vector, which will haunt you well into the fall and will definitely impact your winter mortality. So we want to get a jump on that by talking about what you should be doing in the next few weeks today. Because traditionally, unfortunately, what would happen is when Red River met in September, it was a lot of, well, you should have done this and you should have done that, because the window was either closed or very narrow, and it doesn't really help people telling people what they should have been doing in August. And we're just trying to be as proactive as we possibly can. First off, how many people do we have here? It's only 9. So can everybody unmute your mics for a little bit? You can still raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll call you out. But to start off with, I'd kind of like to go around with the participants and ask, in your area, where your honey flow is at. So we'll start with Kaylin. Can you tell us how your honey flow is going and how it's progressed?
Well, I have a lot of honey, way more than I've ever had, and I haven't actually taken all my honey off. I expect I'm going to have to take a major part of it off in the next 2 weeks, because I'm leaving in the middle of August, so I want to get the honey off before then. But yeah, I've had to take the honey off sort of gradually because I've run out of room for them to produce honey. And
like you've run out of honey supers is what you're saying?
Yeah, I have, because I'm just in the middle of the city, and this was just a hobby, and it's becoming sort of overwhelming now. With the bees are really healthy, and they're just going to town. And I mean, everything is blooming here with all the rain that we've had. And the flowers are just, yeah, I have a lot of honey. I don't know what to do with it.
Well, we can touch base on that later. The nice thing about honey is, of course, it doesn't spoil. So investing in some 5-gallon pails, and just making sure that when you're spinning it off and it's under 18%, it's gonna hold for years and years and years. So.
Oh yeah, I have years and years of honey left. It's piling up in my basement, and so
you should give me a call later. Maybe we can help each other out.
Oh, I would love to. Yes, I will.
Lloyd, how is the honey flow in your area?
Where I'm keeping bees, the primary plant is canola, and it'll be finished by the end of next week.
Now, do you find when canola is gone in that area that it's pretty much like shutting off the tap, or does things just slow down to a more tangible amount?
No, it's the only significant crop available.
Okay.
So when it's gone, bees start robbing. So they're not doing that today, but It'll
maybe
only take another 3 or 4 days and there won't be any bloom left. Like the farmers plant all that canola within a week.
Yeah.
And so it all comes to bloom at the same time.
This is a bit fortuitous for the conversation because this is two different polar opposites, especially with urban beekeeping, because there's usually some stuff around for them to graze on. The Winnipeg area has a few, Sturgeon Creek and a few other creeks, plus the Red and the Assiniboine rivers. So and generally garden forage for bees to trickle stuff in, and the flow will slow, but you do have sort of extended yield coming in compared to where Lloyd has his bees, where it's like suddenly it's like a light switch, and you have to be ready for both. Like with Lloyd, he has to make sure that when his honey flows over, that he has to make preparations for removing the excess honey supers, because robbing can become a problem. Even balancing his colonies if he's got some weak ones. But as well, you're also looking at those bees will be still have a fairly active brood nest, and they'll be consuming resources, and then feeding sooner than later might be on the agenda. But it's also the one benefit of having your honey flow end really quickly is that you can get a good jump on your assessment and your treatment of your mites as well. Where you've got a prolonged honey flow, you have to make a sometimes painful decision on when you want to address those mites, and that also depends on the treatment that you're picking. If you are traveling at the end of October, and I'm looking at you, ma'am, that timing can be pretty not fortuitous for your bees because of treatment and feeding schedules. So you do have to do some juggling in that part. So when your honey flow does evaporate really quickly, if anyone else has bees in an area like that, like Lloyd does. So Lloyd, what would be your next few steps over the next 2 weeks, or when that honey flow shuts down?
I'm thinking about splitting my colonies.
Mm-hmm. You're doing that because you like the winter splits, correct? Or
well, you have a couple of choices. Either you need to reduce the number of bees in the colony,
mm-hmm.
or you need to make another colony out of it. Like almost all the bees that are in the colony right now won't make it to winter.
Because they are summer bees and their lifespans are 30 to 45 days, correct?
Well, I hate the term summer bee, winter bee.
Yeah, I know, but we're trying to keep it so that we can frame it up in simpler.
Yeah, life expectancy of bees during the summer is around 35 days.
Right.
So what that means is that if you had all the brood emerge today, within about 72 to 84 days, that entire population will be dead.
Correct.
It's the winter colony doesn't actually start being formed until you get bees emerging in September. So the only place that colony is going for the next month is smaller. So it's just a question of how fast they get to the smaller and whether you utilize those bees or you throw them away.
So you're utilizing those bees by increasing your colony count by doing splits, correct?
Yeah.
That's your standard program. Are you then? Do you expect those splits to build up to single colony numbers of winter bees to go through the winter, or are you making, preparing nukes for the winter? Like, how do you like to winter your bees?
Well, those bees will be about 12 to 14,000 bees almost no matter what you do.
So you're not worried about doing later season splits and having lower populations going into the winter?
Well, it's because the winter colony is a function of how much brood got reared in September and October.
But when you're doing splits, you're introducing queens you've made, you're like,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
I guess the thing that you have to remember is that those colonies are going to start shrinking quickly right now because they're not going to be producing the same amount of brood to sustain the numbers that are there now.
Correct. Yep.
And I did an experiment for the Saskatchewan beekeepers, and one of the treatments I used was to take adult bees and start a new colony and do my mite treatments. So that works reasonably well because you've got no brood, you just got bees.
Okay. And what is your weapon of choice this year for mite treatment?
I'm not sure if I'm treating for mites this year.
Okay. Well,
I haven't seen a mite in any of my colonies this summer. Like zero. It's been quite unexpected.
okay.
But essentially what I do is if I'm putting in mite strips, I switch between two products, one year and something else the next year.
Do you use organic acids at all, like formic or oxalic?
I haven't used those. I'm lazy. The strips are about match my management commitment.
No, and again, there's both Apistan and Apivar are very effective, and I mean, we could debate efficacy of treatments, but in the end, what it really boils down to is how does it meld well into your system, your program, the time you have, the energy you have, and the amount of bees you're running. So to turn around and say, well, no, miticides are bad, you should be doing formic is a ridiculous statement, because you know, your system, which you've honed for your decades, you've your timing and in your observations, you know what works best for you.
Like when it comes to mites, I'm kind of a Methuselah. When I used to keep bees, there weren't mites. And then I spent my entire career as a field crop entomologist. I didn't have to deal with bees at all. And mites and that type of stuff came in and were not something I ever had to deal with.
Well, and now, do you feel you are winning the war or losing the war? If you've got no mites, I would have to say you're probably on the right side of history.
Well, it's okay not to have mites, but you still have to make sure that you get enough food into those colonies to replace that canola honey that we all know is going rock hard. As soon as it gets into September and October, it'll be so hard that the bees can't use it.
Or really struggle to do so, regardless, yes.
And I understand the price of liquid sugar is going to be significantly higher this year.
Dry sugar too, from what I've been seeing at Costco. $3 or $4 more a bag. like initially, and God knows what happens, in the later months. So,
$27 a bag last I saw.
Brad, I'm gonna hand the helm over to you.
Oh no, I shouldn't have spoke up.
Oh, no,
I'm
no,
still-
yeah.
Cat, what's
It up?
up.
Yeah.
It's out. John.
Thou organized it.
But you were doing so well.
No, I know. You can pass the baton in 20 minutes, and I'll round it off. I want to kind of get your perspective. Like the what I started out doing is going around and asking people how their honey flow was at this point in time. So if you want to continue on, Lloyd and Kaylin
Sure.
chimed in, but
Yeah, we'll do that.
yourself and the rest, not yet. No.
I just want to take the opportunity since Lloyd's here, because he always asks me. I think I have enough queens here now in my mating nukes that I can probably make some of those splits that you keep talking about. So I could maybe try that this year. It's never worked out for me before with the amount of queens that I raise. So I look forward to doing that. So on that theme, everyone, who wants to chime in about their honey flow, how the honey flow is going in your area? Just jump in. We only have 11 people, so we'll just do this. Anyone?
Brad, I can jump in. Sorry to prop you up. I am pretty far from canola this year, but maybe similar to Lloyd, I've seen that it looks like it's going to come to an end any day now. We still have some sweet clover kicking. Most of it's dried up, but we still have some. And then I guess we have some honey flow on because there's still some coming in, but I would think it's mostly wildflowers now in our area as we're past any crops flowering. I don't know the names of them all, but I have a few neighbors with seeds of little yellow flowers and clover still, I call it yard clover, still coming in.
Well, good. It's always nice to have that little bit of fill in August. I usually get that here. Last year, I didn't really get much of that at all, but I usually get a fill in of clover and whatnot. Here, things don't normally come to an abrupt end for another 3 weeks where I am, but I'm not surrounded by seas of canola like someone like Lloyd is. So
Well, the one thing that people around Winnipeg might be able to take advantage of is the Red River floodway. I don't know what the cutting regime and baling that farmers do on that, but if the alfalfa is in full bloom during August, it produces pretty nice honey.
yeah, and I get a lot of that here on the land that's not hayed, which is my small piece, but it's not very big here. Yeah, that floodway is very rich and lush. A lot of it does get hayed pretty fast though, which is unfortunate. But
I don't know if people knew this, but bees don't collect alfalfa pollen.
Yeah, I never thought about putting it that way, but yeah, that makes sense from what I've learned about the honeybees, because they kind of steal the nectar, don't they?
Yeah, well, they just don't collect the alfalfa pollen.
They get around that spring-loaded stamen.
They just don't collect it. I don't think they recognize it as being pollen.
Oh, is that right? They don't have any interest in it at all?
No.
Interesting.
I worked with a lady who did her PhD on bee collected pollens. In the 2 years of her study, she never ever collected any alfalfa pollen.
Interesting.
And I did some stuff for Bayer, and it was the same thing. They just did not collect alfalfa pollen.
So do you know what color it is? If person was to watch for that, do you know what color alfalfa pollen is?
No, I don't know. But I'd be really surprised if you ever get a pellet of it.
Yeah. The honey, when my bees collect a lot of the honey, it seems to be almost a bit of a rusty tinge to it. It's
No,
nice
they,
clear honey, but
the alfalfa honey, if that's all you're getting, is water white.
is that right?
Yeah,
Or something else that really produces in a dry year then?
South thistle or goldenrod.
It's earlier than that. Huh, I always thought it was alfalfa. Anyway, anyone else to report their honey flow status?
Just quickly, Brad, canola is closing in my area, but there is lots of sunflower, and that is very exciting for me. For some reason, there is one landowner who plants sunflower incredibly late. Even last year, it was blooming, and bees are working it well into September.
Oh,
And
that's nice.
And it's been a boon because they backfill the brood chambers with canola. with sunflower honey, which
I hope you found out who that was and went and gave him a big bucket of honey.
I've put out feelers actually. I shouldn't say the landowner. It's someone renting that
Yeah,
acreage, but I
yeah.
definitely am grateful. This is 2 years in a row, and it's been very, very beneficial for me.
Every time I'm out driving around, I'll see something like that and I'll think, oh, I'm gonna run home and get my bees. There's a big field of sunflower about 8 miles south of me, and it just looks like it should have a bunch of beehives on it. It's beautiful.
Well, that's what trailers are for, but it is a lot of, that's an extra element of management for sure.
Yeah, I don't know how I do that with 5 honey supers on some of my colonies. I don't know how I do that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Honey flow status? So maybe, John, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Maybe, John, you can help the novices with some of the ways that they can detect that. So if somebody were to ask me as a novice and say, is your honey flow still on, or has your honey flow ended? I might say, I'm not sure how I would know that, right? So because there are some clues as to how you might know that. So over to you. Give us some of those.
Well, what part of the key is sort of knowing your area, and if you don't really know your area, driving around your bees range to see what is planted, what is growing, and what is in bloom is pretty crucial. I won't just see, hey, look, there's sunflowers out there, or there's canola out there, or there's buckwheat out there. I'll walk the field. I'll walk into the field and make sure it's a variety that was planted that the bees are actually collecting, because there is some sunflowers that do not produce a lot of nectar.
Right.
There's buckwheat that produces very little nectar, and you will see that you're in full bloom at the right time of day that the bees aren't even working it. And taking a look at your ditches, seeing how much sweet clover is blooming around, and really knowing that few miles around your yard where the potential nectar sources are. You can look and watch the traffic coming into your landing boards to see, generally, if they've got loads of pollen, theoretically they should have loads of nectar, but that's not always the case, because if there's lots of pollen and not as much nectar, and they're burning off as much as they're flying, it's kind of disproportionate. Bees also love to work on freshly extracted frames because they're wet. And if you want to know your nectar flow, if you pull a few frames of capped honey and put in some freshly extracted frames and then check on them in a day or two, you'll sort of see where they're focusing on and check the cells and see the progress there. That's not 100, you have to make your own observations, and you also have to have contrast to know what you had to what you're getting. My trickiest challenge has always been is, when do I stop and treat? Because in my area, I can have kind of slow but steady flow through the good part of August. And so it's like, when do you have those honey supers completely off? When can you treat? So, and there's a lot of people that will chase those last kilograms of honey, and they get in trouble with feeding, and they get in trouble with mite treatments. And those are the pitfalls that that's one of the things we should really talk about today, to make sure that you're not turning around trying to make an extra $25 and risking $300 worth of bees.
Or just simply not knowing better. I know my first probably 2 to 3 years, I was late starting to feed every year, and I had to really kick myself and say, look, buddy, you got to get on with this. Because honestly, there have been years, and I've only been, this is only my 9th season keeping bees. There have been years when I've had some kind of a honey flow well into the middle to farther than the middle of September. I've had honey flow near the 20th of September. And, you got to know when to, like John said, you got to know when to cut it off and say, look, you got to start feeding your bees. Because here's what I've noticed with feeding my bees. I feed with inverted pails, and usually I try to make sure that I have 5 gallons of feed for each colony. That's 24 liters. And my pails are 12 liters. So each colony gets 2 pails. I'll prepare a nice tank of syrup, and I'll feed everybody their first pail of syrup. And they'll take that down in probably 5 days. And then I'll put the second one on. I'll think, oh, this is easy. I'll put the second one on, and it sits there for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So that's a month in all, right? So my rule now is, by the end of the first week of September, that they've got to have pails. Not thinking about it. It's got to be Labor Day feeding is my rule. And unfortunately, I just have to say whatever honey comes in at that point belongs to the bees. Now, fortunately, the honey that will be coming in at that point is goldenrod, clovers, and whatnot, which that kind of stuff actually makes pretty decent winter feed, I'm told. So I'm happy about that. But yeah, it's my first year keeping bees. I didn't lose any colony. I had like 10 or 11 colonies in the winter. I didn't lose any of them, but it was the weather gods that smiled on me, because I fed with a jar until the 5th of December. It was so warm, and I was late on my feeding. I got a really late start. So if we'd have had an early winter, 3rd week of October, kind of early winter, my bees would have starved to death likely. So robbing, I think, is one of the most obvious signs. And I'm not saying necessarily robbing one colony, robbing another colony necessarily, because you can usually see that at the entrance. But if they start robbing every little thing, if they're trying to, you see that cluster of bees trying to get into the crack in the cover or the crack in the box or something, you see that kind of thing. Well, that's certainly a sign that there's no honey flow. I'm starting to get bees showing interest in my honey house. So that's a sign that there's not as much out there for them. So, like John was saying, there's not necessarily one surefire indication, but there's a lot of clues and cues to understand whether or not there's a honey flow. I still intend to build stands to accept some hive scales electronic hive scales so that I can track that, so that I can see when the honey is coming in, when the nectar is coming in by weight, and kind of when that tapers off. I think that would help me as a beekeeper a lot.
Well, and there's also those new electronic scales that you slip under your colonies that broadcast the weight changes to your phone. Like
That's what I'm planning to build. It's a Bluetooth. It's a download thing. So I just have to go out there periodically and download the data, and I can see over time what the weight is doing.
And it's not like you have to have them on every colony. You just need to have them on a couple of strong ones in a yard.
One or two in each yard. Yeah. Like one in each yard, as long as it's on the one that's actually, put it on a failing colony, you might get some kind of not very interesting data, but
garbage in, garbage out.
That's right. And that really came true for me last year, because last year was such a goofy year. We had these terrible storms and everything was late, and the June weather never showed up. We went from May weather to July weather. My honey flow was messed up. I didn't know what was going on. And I remember standing in my apiary thinking, it's like my first year beekeeping. I don't know what in the world is going on. And I couldn't help but think, if I had a scale system like that, maybe I would have a clue what in the world is going on here. Because my honey flow ended about the 15th of July last year. It was just crazy how early it ended. So I wasn't expecting that.
Your flow, Brad, is pretty long, steady, slow. Would that be a good description?
It's not as heavy as a canola flow, but it does start. It starts kind of like this for about a week, 10 days, and then it just kind of levels off just above nothing for the next month, kind of thing.
So, how are your mites? What are your percentages?
I don't know.
Okay, good. That's not, and I'm not putting you on the spot as fair trade, but when's the last time, when the last time you did know, what were they?
Oh, that would have been in May, and they were 0 to 1%. I think I might have had a 2 or a 3. But I did another treatment. I used a new treatment I haven't used before, Apolife VAR, after that. And that kind of bumped right into my honey flow, so I didn't actually do a post test on that one. Those colonies I did treat with Apolife VAR, though, boy, they make a lot of honey. They seem to be doing really well.
Good. The reason why I'm asking is because there's 2 ways to go about this. If you know that your honey flow is going to be long and extended, and that treating is going to be a bit more difficult logistically, because you don't want to have, you can't have your honey supers on for a lot of treatments, but knowing where your mites are key. One of the tricks I do is I'll keep an eye on my drone brood, cut open 50 and do a very ad hoc, get a ballpark of if things are looking better or bad. Same with a sugar roll or even an alcohol wash. But if I know I'm okay with my mites, then if I've got a flow that's sort of continuing on longer than expected, someone planted something, or the weather's been good, or it's just been a really great season, then I'm not concerned of pushing treatment to the forefront of my to-do list. If I am worried about, okay, the mites were a little bit there, or maybe I didn't treat in the spring because I didn't have to, and now it's kind of keeping me up at night. You can turn around and rely on oxalic acid as a Band-Aid solution to knock the mites down by pulling your supers off for an hour, giving a good blast of oxalic, and then putting them back on. However, if you ever find that even at the tail end of a honey flow where you've got mites that are crazy beyond control, your percentages are very high, then my advice has always been is to cut the flow short, eat the loss, get the honey supers off, and treat with something with a really high efficacy. Otherwise, you're going to be putting a lot more time and effort into colonies that you're going to have a low percentage of getting through in the winter. And again, it's always been like, where are your mites? Where are your mites? Where are your mites? And experienced beekeepers have a better hang on it because they've been doing it longer and they're tracking more colonies and they have an idea of where their whole operation is. But where sometimes novices fall over is they assume because they treated in the spring, they're okay, or they had a low mite count, they're okay. And they take that monitoring part and they let that slip. And honestly, if you don't know where your mites are at the end of your honey flow, or even right now, how are you going to choose what weapon of choice to combat those mites in the fall? Do you need a stopgap measure? And I've always, I've admittedly gotten very lazy sometimes where I don't know where my mites are at the last, on the 25th of July. So I'll just treat with oxalic acid because I know it can at least, tampers my sins, keeps them at least, the mites, if the mites are a little high, knocks them down, not the ones in the brood, but at least the ones running on the frames. And it kind of hits the snooze button on that particular problem. But people that aren't aware of where their mites are at, this isn't a bad time to take a couple of checks just to monitor. Monitor a 1 in a row, monitor 1 out of 4 if you've only got a few, monitor 1 yard, but just, this is where you can really intervene with an extra half day in the field, solidify your fall program and give yourself some insurance in making it a very good winter, because what we do in August determines our April. So keep it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to comment. I remember a few years back, Jonathan Holford did a presentation at the MBA convention, and he started off by asking the audience a question. And the question was, he said, when do you start preparing for your honey crop? And in the context of his presentation, the answer was 1st of August. And you think, 1st of August, well, honey flow's over 1st of August. Yeah, it is. But what you just said, John, what you do now, between now and end of September, for example, that's going to determine what your next year's honey crop is going to look like. And I understand that not everybody is after a huge honey crop, but healthy living bees make a lot of honey. So if you have healthy living bees, they're going to make a lot of honey. And your goal, regardless of your level of beekeeping and your objectives in beekeeping, should be healthy and living bees. I think. I don't think anybody sets out to raise crappy bees. So that's what, and that's what I've kept telling myself over the years, is that August changes the game for me. August changes the game because up until the 1st of August, it's all you know, I've got so much opportunity here to do things, raise queens, make nukes, make increase, build up, you know, do all this stuff. Now, August, I have to start fortifying. I have to start making sure colonies are strong, making sure I've got my ducks in a row, making sure, and I don't have to do it all August 1st, but every day, and this is me talking to me, every day, the number of options that I have is less. Every day, I have fewer and fewer options every day as I progress toward, you know, and by what I tell myself is by the end of September or so, my fate is sealed for next year. What I'm going to have come 1st of May next year is decided by the end of September this year. Now, I still have to do all the normal wintering stuff, but that's just, you know, paint by numbers. That's just following the rules of wintering. But as far as colony buildup, colony health, queen health, queen age, replacing queens, feeding colonies, treating colonies, nutrition, pollen patties, you know, whatever somebody might want to do for their colonies, all of that stuff determines what I get out of the wintering in the 1st of May. So that's just kind of what I tell myself for that to get me moving on this, because like I said, my first 3 years or so, boy, I was late every year feeding my bees. I was not on the ball, and it was stressful, and fortunately I didn't have any catastrophic loss because of it, but it was dicey, and I don't like that stress. I do not like that stress. I'd rather put a date on it and say Labor Day, you got to feed, and then get the feeding done. And I used to think, well, if I feed them up early and they get their feed on early, won't they eat a bunch of that feed before winter? No, they don't. And that's just what I've noticed. They just don't seem to eat. I know beekeepers who feed their bees, they winter outdoors, they feed their bees up and wrap them by the last week of September, and they're done. You think, well, how do they have enough feed? Well, they do. Particularly because they're not brooding. If they're not raising a substantial amount of brood, they're really not using that much feed, which is typically the first part of the winter.
Well, those bees will consume about 60 pounds of honey during the wintertime.
Right.
Which is more than one full box. So if you're wintering in singles, your bees are on the edge of starvation when spring hits.
Well, I would not argue with Lloyd, but I don't have much starvation at all. Most winters I don't have any starvation, and I normally have 2 to 4 frames of syrup coming out of winter. Is just what I've noticed. I rarely have anybody starve, and they're all singles.
It also has a bit to do with what are you doing in the spring? I mean, if you're, I always have frozen brood frames of the honey stashed away that I can intervene. End of February, March. I mean, you're absolutely right. In my experience is that you are really pushing the boundaries of starvation when you're wintering singles outdoors. Your wraps better be good. Your colonies better be balanced, and you better have a early spring intervention plan put in place, because you can lose some for starvation. But I find I build that intervention into my system, so I'm pretty happy with wintering in singles. But it's like any other style of beekeeping. You can say, doubles gives you that insurance. The pros and cons are there across the board. You just have to make sure that you're aware of your cons and you have a backup plan, because if you have a particularly brutal winter, you better have something ready. And I find that if you're thinking that you can intervene with liquid feed to a starving single in bad weather, that's not going to work. They're dead. But frames of honey really have been my saving grace. That and some significant freezing capacity.
I should ask Lloyd, Lloyd, that number, is that contingent on indoor or outdoor, or is that a pretty stable number between the two methods?
No, that's an outdoor
Okay.
number.
So do you think that's the difference, because mine are indoors?
Oh yeah, if you're talking about indoor, the food consumption is quite a bit less.
Okay, well that makes perfect sense then. Yeah, because I would not disagree that like a single outdoors, that's tight. I know people who do it, but I know they do a lot of extra in the late winter, just to stave off the starvation thing. I know I've wintered doubles indoors. When I first started, I was wintering doubles indoors. Well, come out of winter with 12 frames of syrup. So I gave up on that. So what else, John Russell? Help me along with this. I apologize for being so late and then not starting the meeting. I tried to fit a lot in today and it went a little bit late on me. I apologize. I appreciate everybody's patience with that.
Kaylin, you've got a question?
Yeah, so as far as changes the topic a little bit. So as far as honey goes, what should we be testing our honey for residues? Because I'm doing a lot of reading, and I also saw that there was a study that was being done on quinachlor residues. So I looked that up, and that's in Kilex. Should we be testing our honey for chemical residues before selling it to people, or giving it? Mostly I give it away, but I don't want to be killing anybody.
Do you have any idea what it costs to have material analyzed for chemicals?
Well, I did it my first 2 years. I sent a sample off to Guelph, and I didn't know what I was testing for. So I just picked something, and it was about $125 for one sample.
Yes, if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah,
and it can be as high as $250 a sample.
Oh yeah, depending on what you pick.
Well, if you don't know what you're testing for, it's a function of what the herbicide or a pesticide is soluble in. The solvents they use to extract the pesticides vary with the pesticides being tested. So if you have no idea what you're sampling for, you could probably do 3 samples and get 3 bills, because if you pick the wrong solvent extract, you won't be able to extract it from the sample.
Well, exactly. So this is why I wanted to know if anybody has an experience with what should typically be tested for in Manitoba or in the city where I am. I imagine that things like glyphosate would be, that's in Roundup. So that would be pesticides that people are using on their gardens. And that might, but I mean, is there any standard? Does anybody know anything?
It's not really as much of a standard as well as, like, for instance, where are your colonies right now?
I'm in the middle of the city in the gates.
Okay.
So like there's gardens everywhere and
In the gates, like Headingley-ish gates, or
no, right in the middle of the city, right next to Misericordia Hospital. So I've got the Assiniboine that's goes all around us.
okay, so you have a lot of gardeners
Oh yeah.
as your neighbors. Okay,
Oh
so
yeah.
and they're growing vegetables, I take it, fruits and vegetables, right?
Fruits and vegetables, yes, a lot of flowers. They're big time gardeners here, so there's lots of flowers.
So do you see people doing a lot of treatment with things like Roundup or insecticides?
Well, you see people having their gardeners come and mowing their lawns. So I don't know what they're doing otherwise. If they're spraying.
Bees are a pretty good biological filter. They're also, if they are unwell or poisoned, they have a tendency not to necessarily, and this isn't in all instances, fly home.
Right.
They either drop where they are, or they don't make it back, or they're not let in. That's not 100% true in every instance, but again, they're a pretty delicate creature. Anything that's sprayed, like Roundup is one thing. Roundup, the company claims that Roundup is bee friendly. That's kind of bullshit, but
Yeah.
in concentrations it is. Like when you keep bees in the city, you are going to have a certain level of impurities in your honey from auto exhaust, from dumped airplane fuel, from just the fact that you live in an urban environment. There's going to be some kind of a chemical profile in an urban environment where insecticides or any crops that get sprayed, there's that potential. But if the bees are healthy and the bees have a population that they're providing you with a surplus of honey, it's like a question of, are these bad for the human consumption? And I would have to say that no, they're not bad for human consumption. If you're drinking water from a well, that's you're testing once every 3 months. How do you know how much E. coli you're ingesting? You're going to be getting some in. Is it going to be absolutely pristine, pure? No, I don't think any food source. I mean, it really depends on your level of acceptability. But I know for a fact that there are standards where and levels, and that varies from country to country. But even the most stringent countries, or the European Union is a good example, has some parts per billion tolerances.
Mhm.
It's just the environment we live in. I know a lot of urban beekeepers. I've tasted their honey. I've even purchased their honey. I have no problem marketing it. It's, if your honey's bad off, or if your bees are half dead because of chemical poisoning, you'll know, because you'll see, I don't know, all your bees dead. And then yes, don't eat that honey. But as the normal season, month to month, week to week collection and foraging from your bees in an urban environment, there are bees on balconies in New York and in Los Angeles where there's smog. Like, that honey is consumable. As for where it's produced, you can be picky and choose what you think is best for you, but I wouldn't consider it a health risk, and I don't think the authorities would either.
Okay, so basically there's no standard or
Oh, I'm sure there's a
limit.
standard. I'm sure there's a standard for how many parts per billion of Roundup. Sorry, I'm gonna stumble on the term. But it's not, your honey probably doesn't have it. Like, are you spraying it on your lawn? Are your neighbors spraying it all over the place? Like, if you were living in let's say out near Sage Creek, where everyone wants a McMansion with a perfect green grass yard, maybe that would be a concern. But I don't think where you live that would be, because people like to eat the vegetables out of their gardens, and you have to have a certain amount of faith that most people are going to run with common sense.
Yeah. Well, we hope so.
Yeah, we do. Is it going to be perfect? No, it's not going to be perfect. Is it going to be dangerous? No, it's not going to be dangerous. And that's, and again, you can take that with a grain of salt, but I've got a colony in my backyard, or sorry, I had a colony in my backyard, and I would feed that honey to my grandkids without reservation. And I've got a small house in the city besides the farm out in Petershill. So, I never had a problem with eating it or deeming it safe, but that's my 2 cents.
John,
Yes.
I've been searching while you're talking for an email that I got from Matthew Polinsky. I'm going to read just a paragraph that he wrote here. He said, and this was July 5th. We are still seeking 2022 honey samples to contribute to a Western Canada study of quinchloric residue levels. This will help provide information to establish allowable maximum residue levels and better follow any developments with quinchloric. This data will be stored anonymously. However, we can trace your results in order to provide them to you. Shipping costs will be reimbursed. And I think this might have been sent to MBA beekeepers. I'm not sure. But anyway, so that might be an avenue to contact Matthew and see if you can get in on sending some samples to him for that testing.
Now, that particular compound, what is it prevalent in? Is that a yard spray or
well,
that quinchloric is in Killex.
yeah, we'd be gone Killex.
Okay.
And I think it's also in Roundup. Although Roundup has also got glyphosates in it, so.
Quinchloric is a selective herbicide used primarily to control weeds in rice crops, but is also used in other agricultural crops and is found in some household herbicides for lawn use. Most lawn maintenance companies use the product for control of annual grass weeds like crabgrass. So I think that's probably what you're looking at, Kaylin, isn't it?
Right.
Because you're in the city, and that's would have been the source probably if you have it.
Yeah. Some people in my area, they have their lawn spray. They have the little signs up and everything.
That probably would be it.
But not a lot.
Carrie, jump in if you have a question or comment.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, I wanted to ask if anyone has any experience and then any tips for bees that have become more aggressive than they ever used to be. We've always felt that our bees were quite calm and friendly, but this year, maybe just once or twice before pulling some honey last week, just being out on our back deck, the hives are just on the side of our house, so they're pretty much in between our front and back decks. But off to the side, there's no windows. We generally don't go over there unless we're going to the bees. We found that they might, like a single bee might come find you on the deck, and generally we've all been in harmony and they just fly around, check out the flowers I have on the deck, sometimes check out the hose or something. But this year they seem to have become more aggressive and pestering you. And then since having taken off some honey last week because again, they were getting too heavy for me, and also we were close to running out of super space, so we took off some and we'll do the rest in a bit. They've become even more aggressive, and you can maybe get 5-10 minutes out on the front or back deck, and it's usually just a single one finds you and is after you to sting. And my tactic is run away and run to the other door and get inside and give them 10-15 minutes, and then I can get another 10-15 minutes outside. I've even had to resort to put on my bee suit to do the gardening in the front, just because I wanted to get it done, and one had found me. So yeah, any tips on or theories on why they've become aggressive? We did introduce a split this year and put in a queen that we had purchased. I think it was a Hawaiian Kona queen, but we don't actually think it's that high. We tried to kind of base off doing our last inspection. We have 3, which one it might be that is perhaps more aggressive than the others. And we think it would actually be our strongest, which is an overwintered. If I remember correctly, that is a queen that hive raised themselves. Something had happened, it was queenless, they raised that one. And it's been friendly for, I'd say, a year at least. It was friendly last year. So we do think it's that high, but again, we're kind of just guessing at which one gets the most aggravated when we're going into the hive for an inspection.
I don't know, John. Any any wisdom there? You're muted, my friend.
But there we go. There's a few triggers that you should kind of take a look at. One is something aggravating that colony specifically, aggravating all of your colonies, but that one's the most temperamental because it happens to be the strongest. Because you are close to the river.
Yeah.
Okay, so first thing I would do is I would check my bottom boards and the very edges of my colonies for any claw marks where what might be that skunks are coming up and in the evening or at night and scratching at the colonies and eating your bees like Tic Tacs. This will create pissy bees all through the next day. The other thing is we're really starting to notice wasps and hornets as nectar sources start shutting down. And if you have, if you check around your eaves or your garden growth, both on your properties, your property or in your neighbors, if you can, if you see any wasp nests, I would destroy them because they might be causing your bees to be at a certain level of defensiveness because they will start to really try to rob out now. The third is a genetic component where you just really have a nasty queen who likes making nasty babies, and requeening is an option that can change the temperament of a hive over time. But it's either genetic or it's external. And because it's urban beekeeping, it is something it's hard to kind of push off because you have neighbors, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll say rural residential. I have neighbors. I don't think our bees generally spend much time in anyone's in their yards, but all good points. I happen to have a camera that I can go put out, so I have it to check what goes under my shed. I will situate it to see if anything's bothering the bees at night.
It could be. It could also be predatory, like birds will perch on the lids and snap at bees going into the upper entrance. So if there's any bird droppings on your lids, that's an indicator as well. Now, and when bees go out and forage, they're generally not in a defensive mind. It's only when they're within, a certain amount of meters from the colony. So
exactly why I think it's only really happening if we're on our front or back deck, and that is that we are, I'm not a good gauge of distance, but we are within eyesight of the hives, just around the corner of the house there. So as soon as you get further from the deck, you generally are safer than if you're near the back deck.
Yeah, it just seems that either something's bothering them or you've just got a genetic set that really likes to be aggressive. So
That's a really good point,
All
John.
right.
You know, that bee that has come and won't leave you alone and stuff. That's not a forager. Like foragers, I think I'm under the impression that foragers, you know, they know what a dangerous job they're doing, and they would far rather stay under the radar and get their job done, because you know how focused honeybees get. They once they get their mind on something, it's just like nothing else will take them away from it. So that bee, and I get that bee in my apiary too. I spend a lot of time in my apiary without my veil, just, you know, if I'm just working around in there. And yeah, you'll always get that one. It just won't let you alone. That's not a forager. That's some guard bee that's got some mission, you know, to get rid of this beekeeper guy for some reason.
Yep. They definitely a suicide mission, because they either get taken out with the hose or can get a shoe or a slap on them.
Yeah, I whack them if I can. I mean,
yeah,
they can die after they sting me or before.
Exactly.
Either way, right?
Exactly.
They will. So,
Right.
well, I wish you well with that. Yeah, aggressive
hopefully.
Colonies. So does that colony, when you manage that colony, when you're pulling honey and stuff, you said they're still kind of pissy as a group?
It's just, and it might be partly that we perceive it that way because it is the strongest of the three.
Yeah.
And it just seemed that they were the most after just even stinging our gloves while we were going into them, which it was a good time and a reminder that when our gloves and kind of suits were quite dirty, I quickly gave everything a wash. I don't actually, question for the group, does anyone know how long kind of like that sting defense pheromone might last on you or your clothing? I had tried researching it and I couldn't quickly find a good answer. So I just opted for, I'm going to give everything a quick wash, because we definitely had quite a few stingers in our gloves from our past.
I don't, admittedly, I don't wash, well, I don't really wear a bee suit or anything, but I don't wash stuff very often, and usually I just cover it up. I'll just use my smoker and blow the smoke upwind and cover myself in smoke.
Fair. Yeah.
If they're starting to get me a little bit.
The one thing I would say is you should probably lose the gloves.
Can I ask? I'll ask why, but
Yeah.
I'll also say I probably won't listen because I am quite allergic and any sting will swell me up, and I'd rather deal with the gloves than.
That's a good reason to wear gloves right there.
But I am curious as to why you say that, Lloyd.
Well, I've worked at several apiaries where they didn't allow employees to wear gloves at all. And these were very large queen rearing facilities. And the other thing is, if you're not wearing gloves, you tend to have some finger awareness to whether you're got your finger on a bee or not. Where if you've got a glove, you've probably crushed that bee or at least irritated it significantly. Where if you don't have gloves on, you can just move the bees along and you know whether you've put your finger on a bee. You tend to develop a fairly light touch because getting stung in the fingers is not something you like to have happen.
Which is, I started with using just thin nitrile gloves, and after a few times of getting, this finger is not actually that bad. It's just, for me, it's a sting anywhere in my forearm or my wrist that is the worst. And I've opted for it. It gets worse every time, so I've opted for I need the full gloves.
Yeah.
Also, on a side note, sorry to interrupt, Lloyd. Did you change your laundry detergent or a shampoo anytime this season?
Laundry detergent, no, but
my sister's partner had a conditioner she started using that would drive the bees into this rabid frenzy of hell, and it took us 2 weeks to figure out what that was, and It could be that if you're washing your bee suit and you changed your laundry detergent, it
This
or
is
your
the yeah. Good point, John. This is the first time I've washed the bee suits. I'm like, okay, they are pretty dirty. I'll give everything a wash. But even just in terms of our clothes we're wearing under them, that's one thing I can confidently say is no change to the laundry soap because I have a favorite and I don't deviate from it. But perhaps maybe, actually, no, they've gone after my husband's father, who's completely bald, but maybe other like other products. I don't know.
Like I've
But
noticed that problem as well. Like I was keeping bees in an apron in Saskatchewan, and I'd work all day and the bees wouldn't be stinging me. And the property owner would come along to have a chat with me, and within a couple of minutes he was being stung. Like I don't know if it was deodorant or something that he had in his diet that the bees found really aggravating, but they wouldn't be stinging until he came along.
I see the same thing, Lloyd. I have a buddy, he actually is a hobby beekeeper, and he's the guy, he's dressed like an astronaut when he's keeping bees, you know, head to toe, everything's covered and can't even tell who it is kind of thing. And I'm wandering around my yard with, you know, 80 colonies of bees in it. I'm cutting the grass without even a veil. And he comes to visit and he gets within 100 yards of the apiary and he's getting stung. That we don't understand how, you know, don't get it. And I think it's got to be some personal pheromone or odor or something, you know, like you say, diet or grooming products or laundry detergents or anything like that. There's got to be something involved there. It's really weird.
But if you're working bees with gloves, you tend, either you or the other people around you tend to get stung a lot more than if you're wearing no gloves at all. Like
I wouldn't disagree with that. I stopped wearing gloves about 3 seasons ago, and I know for darn sure I'm a whole lot more careful beekeeper without thinking about it. I don't think about it. It's just the way I move now. It's a little bit, sure, I can work a lot faster with gloves, but I can't find them. I don't know where they are anymore.
Well, you start crushing bees if you're wearing gloves.
Yeah, you do. You do. Yeah.
And one of the organizations I worked at was a package bee operation where you were shaking bees out of frames, and nobody working there wear gloves. You can almost see where people are wearing gloves, they tend to get stung more frequently.
I would kind of agree because you do lose that tactile sense, as you were saying, Lloyd. I also think that people wear gloves are okay, this is probably not going to be quite politically correct, but people that wear gloves are usually new at beekeeping because, and I'm a big fan of this, I think you should wear a big heavy suit. I think you should wear anything that makes you feel confident, because the more confident you are, the less the bees are going to be bothering you. But I do think I've always felt gloves were incredibly clumsy, and usually people that wear gloves are kind of just starting out. I think you progress into not wearing gloves unless you do have allergies or certain circumstances, because you just find that you're just able to manipulate the bees with a finer touch, and that means you get stung less. So if you're a novice, you're wearing gloves and you get stung more. It's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And but
well, the impetus for me to kind of taper off gloves was when I started doing queens. You can't do queens with gloves. Like, forget it. I see people trying to do stuff even with nitriles. No, you can't manipulate queens. You can't pick queens up. You can't introduce them. You can't mark them. You can't, whatever you need to do with the queens, put them in cages and things like that. You can't do any of that with gloves of any kind on. And, some people are like, well, I can. No, don't do it. So when I started doing that, then I was put the gloves on, take the gloves off, and put the gloves on and take the gloves off, and put the gloves on, take the gloves off. And it was just annoying. So I started to try to, okay, well, let's not use the gloves right now. And it was, yeah, this is kind of working out. And I got different sensations too. After so many years of keeping bees, then I realized, wow, the heat coming out of this hive is amazing. Just things that you feel that you don't feel when you're wearing gloves. You don't feel that hot air rising up out of that brood chamber, and the breeze of the bees fanning against your hands is quite remarkable. And Dominic, your hand is up. Jump in if you have a question or comment.
Yeah, I have to. John knows that I will be wearing gloves for now. Because I got stung mid-July and my hand swelled up, lost 3 days of work. Not gonna do that again. But I mean,
yeah, if you have serious reactions, nobody can fault you for PPE if you have serious reactions. And I am not one to shame anybody on PPE. You wear everything you think you should wear. However, the preceding conversation, that's still valid. That still is. You do change if people talk about, well, I think my bees know me now because I don't get stung as much as I used to. So the bees have gotten used to me. They know. I don't think that's the case at all. The bees have trained you, is what's happened. You've learned how to live with the bees and not set them off, is what I believe has happened. I don't think they get to know you at all.
Well, I walk around my hives all the time without any equipment. It's just I need my equipment when I go in. That's all. And that's what happened last time. I did my stuff. I took my gloves off. I walked away, and there you go. He caught me. What the heck? It's like, yeah, I got an aggressive hive too, but I mean, it's very strong. So I'm not gonna get rid of the queen. So. Anyways, I got a couple of questions. One is very simple. Do you know what the food safe lubricant is for, like, I want to clean the extractor? They say put a little bit of lubricant at the bottom to, are they talking about just like olive oil, grapeseed oil, or canola oil or something?
No. There's actually food safe industrial machinery grease that the CFIA approves of it. You can find it at if you go to Russell Hendricks on Aaron and Ellis. Yeah. They would probably have it, or you can get it on Amazon.
Well, B-Mate carries that.
Yeah. B-Mate will carry that. It's just a white grease, and you can eat it. It's probably very similar to Vaseline or God knows, but it's not gonna it's CFIA approved, so it's good for you.
What I do is I have a grease gun dedicated to that one tube of grease,
right?
And I keep it in the honey house. It's the only place that grease gun goes. It's the honey house. It never leaves that building.
Yeah, because I got to start cleaning my extractor, because I think I'm going to start this weekend. And you know what? I don't know if I'm not a big guy, so I just do a little bit of extracting here and a little bit of extracting there, and like I do 10, maybe 20 frames in 1 week, and then next week I do another 10, 20 until I'm done. But September 1st, I agree, Brad, that September 1st, that's it. I'm done. I got to start feeding, because I did get caught before. So the other question I have for you, John, is we talked about that earlier. I drive around and I see a lot of flowers out there. Those bird's foot trefoils are just like almost like a canola field out there. And I'd love to have those hives out there too, But do you have to ask permission if you want to put the hive somewheres, like in where there's no,
The only time you don't have to ask permission to put hives on land is when you own it. And even then, the municipality may disagree. You have to do your diligence for a couple of reasons. One is you're trespassing. Number two, if it's crown land, generally speaking, it's permissible. They'll let you do it. You just have to sort of just touch base with either natural resources or the municipality to see who you could be in contact with. But you just can't, even if it's just the crossover between the road and over the ditch to the field, you have to respect other people's property when you're putting your property on it. Otherwise, your property may just become their property, or you may find your property in a burning pile. You just don't, it can be a really touchy subject when it comes to trespassing. So if you don't know who owns the land, you can just go up to a neighbor's house and figure it out pretty quickly. And generally speaking, a gallon of honey is usually easily accepted rent. And if they're growing crop on it or even pasture, they're happy to have the free pollination services. So just do your homework and and find out who it is.
or just go around the houses and find out if anybody has that you can get permission, because like I go down the Keniston and it almost looks like a canola field, but it's bird's foot trefoil.
Mhm.
I'm sure that's good for the bees, right? And so
It actually, trefoil, generally speaking, it's a bit hit or miss. If I'm not mistaken, and Lloyd may know better, that they can even starve on it.
I would think trefoil is actually a pretty decent crop for honeybees.
Well, but it is that would be public land, right? Like city land,
That's right.
the boulevards.
yeah.
Yeah, you would probably need the city's permission. And then they would turn around and say, well, if you're urban beekeeping, then you need to fence it.
Right.
Yeah, because they require a 6-foot fence on the property, right?
Right.
So
And don't forget too, there's sometimes people aren't sure about distances either. You don't need to put your bees within 20 feet of a nectar source, to give them access to it. They fly a long way. So, if you're within a quarter mile of that, they're going to be on it if that's what they want, or they'll find something better.
yep, you could find someone's yard and just register the property with the city to keep bees on it.
Yeah.
And if they don't care, it's just at the back of their yard, and then, mission accomplished. So, and just have it adjacent to the property you're looking at.
I got another question about the mites. You talked about you got to know where your mites are right now. I have to admit that last fall I didn't have any, and this spring didn't have any, so I'm not too worried about it. But a couple of years ago, I said the same thing, and by the time I was extracting, I saw these bees with no wings and all that kind of stuff, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh.
So why aren't you worried about it?
Well, I'm not worried right now because I had 0 in the spring and last fall, but I will check now. The problem is that I won't be treating anyways until all my supers are gone and I finish extracting. So why should I really know what they are now?
Well, if it really depends if you want your bees to be sick and die during the winter, or you want your bees to be healthy and alive during the winter, and whether there's a honey flow on or not, or whether there's it's inconvenient or not, the mites just don't care. And the mites, if you take a look at their reproductive cycle, you could have no mites or very little mites in, let's say, May, April. But if you got some mites in, whether it was drift or you caught a swarm, or maybe you just didn't, you made a mistake checking. Now you may have rampaging mites and you don't know, and you're going to wait and you're going to extract that honey, and the mites are doing damage, and you're going to get a good honey crop. and your bees are compromised. And all I'm suggesting you do so that you can sleep at night is take a hive, pull the honey supers off for 3 minutes, do a quick check, put the honey supers back on, and at least you know where you are.
I would
And if you-
imagine using the strongest hive to do that with, right?
that would help, but in the end, it's like if you do have a mite problem and you want to wait, at least you could turn around and use oxalic acid and keep that mite problem at bay, depending on how bad it was. Before your extracting was done. It's like you can, like, all I know is that in my experience, every time I pushed it off, every time I waited, every time I wanted to get my extracting done, or God, I'm not pulling 5 honey supers off of these colonies, I paid for it, because 250 pounds of honey, you know, or 200 pounds of honey, you know, even at $3 a pound or $2.50 a pound or $2 a pound, that's a huge amount of your profit gone when you're replacing your bees.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a question of if that's the way you want to go. I'm not going to lambaste you for it, but you've done this enough seasons to know how it could end, and you have to assess your own risk.
I think it's important to make the point. You know, when we're talking about these mites, we're talking about two things here. Basically, we're talking about the mites, which do cause damage to the bees and they compromise the bees. But I think more so, we're talking about the viruses that they vector. Now, if at any given point you treat your bees and you knock your mite levels back substantially, or you even get rid of all of them, which isn't possible, but say you do, you've now taken care of the problem of the mites damaging your bees by, you know, drilling holes in them and sucking their innards out and that kind of stuff. You haven't done anything for the viruses. You've done nothing for the viruses that have been vectored into your bees. Your bees are going to live with those viruses for many months to come. That's the damage. That's the damage that is going to be weighing on your bees that winter.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree, because that's probably what happened to me 2 years ago. When you
So
start seeing deformed wings and stuff like that, then chances are you got viruses in there.
That's
And,
right.
you know, I treated, and then 2 weeks later I checked, and I still the alcohol wash, I still counted 27, and that's still excessive. Of course, they did not survive the winter. So
Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with. Anita, your hand is up. Jump in if you have a question or comment.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about just what everybody does once they've extracted from their honey supers, what they do to sort of dry them out before. I know some people say they put them on the back on the colony for a little bit, or else they lay them on their side and have them sort of robbed out. But what generally, or what the different options are that people do?
I've let them clean them out. I've put them away sticky. I've put them into my building just right out of the extractor. I've set them in the bee yard and let the bees lick them out. I don't really have any reason to do one or the other, really. Usually comes down to I need to get them out of the honey house, but I can't get them into my building because it rained and there's mud. So I have to leave them outside, and then the bees get into them. You know, that's how it goes around here. Not very scientific, but that's the way it is.
Thank you.
I can't imagine that letting them. I think it's a little bit harder on the bees to let them rob them. Bees get so nasty when they're robbing, so I think it gets a little bit hard on those foragers. But barring that, I think there's probably a lot of honey in there that the bees take, because boy, are they dry when the bees are done with them. They're really dry. So, you know, they've taken all that in and stored it for winter or something. So Yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
'cause
have
I
an
just
opinion on what's better.
We just have a hand crank, and I'm not sure that we get it all out. I bought a knife this year, so we've sort of moved up that way that maybe I'll be able to get them drier. But I always knew there was a lot of honey in there. But okay, that's very helpful. Thanks.
Have we sufficiently covered August, September? Should we be talking wrapping? Have we talked feeding well enough? We've talked about mites a lot. Kaylin, your hand is up.
Oh, I just wanted to say about the cleaning of the frames. Once I extract mine, and I don't have a big operation, I have a crank extractor as well. I put them out in the yard, and the bees clean them up. I mean, it's quite a big event, but in a couple of days they're cleaned off, and then I put them in the freezer for 24 hours and then wrap them up in plastic bags and then store them like that in tubs, big tubs outside in the garage. So that's my regime.
I'm curious about the freezer.
Oh, to kill any, I read that kills the any wax moth larvae.
It can. Honey supers, haven't really had a lot of trouble with wax moth and honey supers.
Oh, I did one year. It
Did
was
you?
horrible. Yeah, a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
I lost a lot of frames. Yeah.
Okay, well, keep at it then.
Yeah.
I know people who live in hive beetle territory will do that. They'll freeze supers or something just to make sure there's no larva left over in there.
Honey frames, though, that get, like, we store ours just in a shed, which freezes in the wintertime. Would the damage happen before winter then?
Yeah, it can.
Okay.
I mean, with honey super storage, also with something, and wrapping is something that we should probably cover. We can touch base on it now, but we should cover it in September so it's fresh. Feeding, however, generally speaking, feeding too early can be a little bit tricky because you don't want to backfill your brood chamber too much and not have that space available for your winter bees. Excuse the term, sir. Being created in August, September, but you don't want to wait too late either. Like Brad, you're a first week of September guy. So am I. And you just don't want to let it too late, because just because they take the feed into the colony, keep in mind they still have to dry it down. Otherwise, you're putting colonies into winter with a lot of extra moisture inside. So early is better than late. And if you're going to feed very early, maybe regulate the amount so that you're not binding everything up.
I've learned that uncured feed is just poison. It's that's just certain death, because that'll absorb. It absorbs atmospheric moisture, and it's very humid in the hive, so it just keeps absorbing moisture. It ferments and spoils and sours, and it starts running out the door. And I see this because if it happens in the shed, and I know when I see syrup running out the door, that's a bad sign. They didn't cure all their feed. That's what it means. So either the colony was weaker, or I didn't feed early enough, or the weather was too cold, or something. So the only thing I can control there is feed early, right? Because like I said, they'll take 2.5 gallons of feed in 5-6 days, and then the next 2.5 gallons takes 3 weeks.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Pollen patties, John. So I think that's kind of an optional thing. There's a lot of beekeepers don't do it and a lot to do. So I don't know how much real science or knowledge there is behind that. I've typically always done, well, maybe not my first couple of years, but I've done that. So I'll basically put what I call it, I'll put a patty in a pail when I pull the honey. I get a patty in a pail on Labor Day, kind of around that area.
If you have natural, abundant natural pollen, they have a tendency to ignore the patty anyway. Like with me, I'm a little bit of a miser, so I will watch the bees coming in, and if I think they've got abundant pollen, then I won't put a patty on. If I'm unsure, then I'll put a slice of patty on, and then I'll peek at it after a couple of days on a few test hives. And if I find they're just going after that patty or that sliver of patty, then I'll allocate patties to the yard. But if I don't find that, if I find that they're ignoring it, then I kind of wait until they become interested in it. Because pollen patties keep very well in the freezer, and they do not keep very well on the hive. So to me, that's just
Yeah, that's absolutely
kind of
correct.
insurance.
And the wisdom I've been given too says don't feed pollen patties late. And late is probably, I don't know, second week in September. Like if you get to the 15th of September and you think, oh, I should do pollen patties, don't do pollen patties.
I've been playing around with sugar boards and putting a little bit of pollen patties with the sugar boards. I don't know. I haven't really kept serious notes, so they eat it. I don't know if it does any good, or maybe it's just me trying to use up old pollen patties. But it's
just to me, it has to do with filling their guts with a bunch of solids that they're not going to avoid.
Yeah.
Right before that long winter nap, and you want to have that nice and clean with nice, clean, fresh syrup in there. So, yeah, I've never noticed, and I will say I've never had a colony ignore my fall pollen patty, except in a case where something's wrong. It's queenless or something like that. I have actually had not noticed queenless colonies, and I'll put them into the building, and I'll open the dead out in the spring, and there's a pollen patty sitting on top of the frames that I put in September. And of course they're dead because they had no queen. But that's the only time I've ever seen them really not use it in the fall.
This is going to sound a bit off topic, but I've mentored beekeepers that were very good about taking the short beekeeping course and joining Red River and getting bees from good Manitoba stock and getting good equipment and attending the meetings, and then realizing that this time of year they have no extractor. Is anyone in a situation where their extractor isn't either sufficient or they don't have one and didn't really add all the numbers to realize that 200 pounds of honey doesn't come out of the comb itself?
That was me in 2015.
Yeah, I've done it.
Early August, it's like, wow, look at all the honey. I need an extractor.
Yeah, sometimes trying to find an extractor this time of year is like trying to find a snowblower in a blizzard. But if anyone has this issue or is looking for a small motorized extractor, I could probably help them out or connect them up anyway.
I got a handheld 2-frame extractor. I might not be using anymore because I got a 4 electric. So
yeah. There's a Murphy's Law thing too, that as soon as you get rid of your older extractor, your new one breaks down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that happens.
That's happened to me a couple of times, but I mean, yeah, you can if you've got 3 extractors, you've got at least one too many.
So Dominic and everyone on that, if you're looking to unload that, Dominic, or anything, you know, people have, because we're not publishing BCause during the summer, I've offered to kind of circulate advertisements for it, because, you know, advertising is free for members. So if you want to advertise anything like that, compose whatever advertising. I'm not going to make content for you. Compose whatever advertising you want, and I will just email it to the membership on your behalf as a supplement to the non-existent BCause for the summer. Because if you wait for the BCause to come out in September, you're not likely to sell your extractor in September.
Probably not. No.
I'll be extracting in September, but I don't need an extractor. At least I don't think I do. Well, we're 2 hours less the time that I was late. I apologize for that again. Anyone else have a question or comment before we wrap things up for this evening? September 5th will be our next one. Yep.
Brad, it's Gary. Can you
Hi,
hear
Gary. Yep.
me? When do you start feeding? If you stop in mid-September, when do you start?
For my bees and my management, I start around Labor Day, like right around Labor Day.
So for like 2 weeks, you feed them for 2 weeks.
Well, I feed them until they're full, and generally that's about 5 gallons a colony of thick syrup.
Oh, sir, I thought you were talking patties.
Well, patties I'll do at the same time, and I'll feed them 1 pound. They probably, you know, they might take more than 1 pound, but typically I put 1 pound on at the same time when I put that first pail on.
Mm-hmm. Do you feed over the winter?
No. Everybody's fed by Thanksgiving.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Thanks for filling in where I let things go there, John, when I was late. I apologize for that.
Oh, no
Big day
worries.
and just hurrying to get things done, and I just sat down and I realized it was 10 after 7. Okay, on that note, I'll say good night. Thanks for showing up, and good luck with your bees.